Do you enjoy going camping? Would you go camping in a cabin? How about a cabin in the woods? Hey, what if there was something waiting for you inside the cabin? Maybe some company that you didn't invite. Welcome back, I'm here. And these are cabin horror stories that will terrify you. Our first story is The Watcher. I was backpacking with my boyfriend and a couple of our friends at the time through a national forest. We had been walking for a few hours and were getting close to our campsite. Then we heard what sounded like screams in the forest. Big guttural screams. None of us had ever heard anything like it. So we kept walking, trying not to make too much noise ourselves. When we finally got to the clearing where our campsite was supposed to be, we found an old cabin. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. There was also a hand-drawn sign posted on the door that read, "Do not enter. This cabin has been condemned." Well, not wanting to spend the night out in the open, we decided to go inside. As we pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, we noticed that someone or something had recently been living there. There was a pile of blankets and dirty clothes in what looked like a makeshift bed. We figured it must have been a drifter who had taken shelter in the cabin. As we explored the rest of the house, we found more and more signs of recent activity. Dishes in the sink, scraps of food all over the counters. And then we found a diary. We felt a bit creepy reading the diary, but we wanted to know what this person was doing living in this condemned cabin. In the diary, we learned that the drifter had been watching us since we had arrived at the forest. He had been following us, waiting for us to get tired, so he could break into our camp and do God knows what. He wrote about how much he enjoyed scaring people and hearing their screams. He described the different tricks he would play on unsuspecting campers, how he liked to hide in the trees and watch them. Some of the entries even went back years, which made us wonder if our cabin had a history of violence. We ended up spending the night in that cabin with no beds, blankets, or sleeping bags. The only place we could think to hide was under a pile of dirty clothes. I'll admit that most of the story was probably made up, but that still doesn't explain why we kept hearing those screams in the forest. While we never did find any other signs of human life, there was one thing that made me question everything. Before we left, we checked the locks on the front door, making sure they were secure. But when we came back from our hike the next morning, both locks were broken. One of the windows was also shattered. We spent the entire night hiding in a pile of dirty clothes, and not one of us had the courage to look outside to see what was out there. I don't want to think about what might have been lurking outside that cabin, but I will say that we never found any signs of forced entry. Those locks were broken from the inside. Our next story is The Hitchhiker. My sister and her friend were hitchhiking from Tennessee to Arizona to visit some friends at college. They had been on the road for several days when they ran out of gas just off an interstate exit in West Virginia. Luckily, a man in a pickup truck offered to drive them to the nearest gas station. He dropped my sister and her friend off, filled their car up with gas, and drove off. A little while later, as they were driving down a narrow road, they saw a sign for a campground, cabins, and a swimming hole. The girls thought that maybe they could rent a cabin for the night and rest before hitting the road again in the morning. So they turned around and headed back the way they came. When they passed the man in the pickup truck again, he waved at them. They waved back and continued on to the campground. They checked in and were shown to their cabin. It was small, sparsely furnished, and smelled faintly of mildew. My sister and her friend decided to take a dip in the swimming hole before settling in for the night. While they were swimming, they couldn't help but notice that the man from the truck was watching them from the edge of the woods. They changed into their swimsuits and headed back to the cabin. They could still feel the man's eyes on them. When they opened the door to the cabin, they found two men waiting for them. They had duct tape over their mouths and were kneeling on the floor. The men struggled against their bonds and tried to speak, but all that came out were muffled sounds. My sister and her friend screamed and ran out of the cabin. They could hear the men shouting after them, but they didn't stop running until they reached their car and locked themselves inside. The next morning, after calling the police, the girls returned to the cabin to find out what had happened. The cabin had been completely empty the night before. No sign of the men or any struggle. The police searched the area, but found no trace of the men. To this day, my sister and her friend wondered what would have happened to them if they hadn't gotten away. Our next story is cabin fever. I was visiting my aunt and uncle who lived near a lake in Wisconsin. They had a cabin on the lake where we would stay every summer. One of my favorite things to do was to explore the surrounding woods. I remember finding an old tree fort in the woods during one of my adventures. It was up in the branches of a big oak tree, and you could climb up to it using a ladder. The tree fort was really old, though. The ladder was broken and the planks of wood were rotten. I could tell that no one had been up there in years. One afternoon, I convinced my cousin to come up to the tree fort with me. We climbed up the ladder and sat on one of the planks. Suddenly, the plank broke and I fell to the ground below. I skinned my knee and scraped my palm. I started to cry, but my cousin ran into the cabin to get some ice. When she told my aunt what had happened, my aunt freaked out and told her that no one was allowed to go near that tree fort anymore. That night, we were having dinner at the cabin when my aunt started telling us stories about her brother, my uncle's brother, who had died in that tree fort. Apparently, he had been playing with a group of friends when he fell to his death. His friends had run to get help, but by the time they came back, he was already dead. My aunt said that she and her brother had sworn never to let anyone go near that tree fort again, but apparently that didn't stop him, because we had stayed in that cabin many times since then, and every time I hear a branch creak or a rock fall, I can't help but wonder if I am gone, nah, be the next one to die at that tree fort. Would you ever go camping? Let me know in the comments below and tell me which story scared you the most. If you want to hear more scary stories, check out more content. And if you want to support the channel even further, consider becoming a member. Thanks for watching. See you next time.